Hello everyone, good afternoon or good evening, wherever you are joining us from. And welcome to this TX InFocus webinar for the September 2025 exams. My name is Kirsty McIsaac and I am the Solutions Management Lead for the Student Support Team here at ACCA. Today's session is the Examiner's Report Unlocked. So we're going to take a deep dive into the latest Examiner's reports from the combined March and June 2025 exam sessions. And we're going to uncover some strategies that you can use to boost your exam performance. Our expert tutor today is Helen Forster, and during the session she's going to share some important insight from the examiner's report. So that will include some common pitfalls for you to avoid, and she's going to illustrate some essential technical points with examples. Helen's also going to show us how to use some of the key exam practice resources effectively. So things like the marking guides and sample answers, and also how to present your exam responses clearly and confidently. And of course, before we wrap up, we'll also cover some of your live questions that have come in from the Q&A box. Now, before I pass you over to Helen, for anyone who hasn't joined one of these webinars previously, let's just run through a few quick housekeeping items. So at the bottom of your screen, there are a number of buttons that you can use. You can click the help icon for quick access to resources and information that can assist you with any technical issues during the session. The Q&A window is where you can submit your questions to the ACCA team and to Helen. Make sure both the slide and the media player icons are selected on your screen because you'll need both of these to view the webinar. You can use the chat function to engage with your fellow participants. So why not use that to say hello and tell us where you're joining from. But please, in the chat function, do not share any personal information. And finally, look out for the icon that resembles a file. So clicking on that will give you access to helpful materials that are related to today's webinar, including direct links to some of our resources. Now, feel free to move things around on your screen, resize the windows however you like. And if ever you can't hear us or the visuals disappear, just try refreshing your browser because that quite often fixes the problem. By registering for today's webinar, you will get an email tomorrow with all the details on how to watch it again. So don't worry if you have missed anything or if you run into technical issues, you will be able to catch up with the recording later on. So I'm going to hand you over to Helen in just a moment, and I'll be back with you just towards the end of the session. Now remember, if you have a question that you'd like to ask, then please post it in the Q&A section, not in the attendee chat. We may not be able to respond to everybody individually, either through the chat or verbally in the live session, but we will do our best to share the questions and answers that are the most helpful for the wider audience. And so with that, I will hand you over to Helen.
Thank you very much, Kirsty. So my name is Helen Forster and I work as a tutor and content specialist for Kaplan. So I've been working for Kaplan since 1997. So I'm on the way to my 30 years of service where they'll give me some extra holiday. So during that time, I've taught a lot of students, I've marked a lot of exams. So I would like to help by sharing some of my insights with you today. So as Kirsty said, the programme for today, we're going to start with a look at the most recent examiners' reports and also have a look at the brand new Look Practice platform, it's hard to say, the latest syllabus, talk through some effective exam strategies, and hopefully there should be time for some questions and answers at the end. So if you share your questions as we go through, and then I'll pick up as many as possible towards the end of the session. So we're going to start with the most recent examiner's report. So that's the one from the March-June sitting. And the examiner's report is really useful because it has some Section A questions which are not released on the practice platform. We don't get to see Section A of the exam in full, so that's the 15 objective test questions, but there are going to be a sample of these in every examiner's report. Now, the thing to note about Section A is that Section A covers pretty much everything. And one of the comments that the examiners always make is that students go wrong by not revising enough syllabus areas. So basically, the more different things you revise, the more likely you are to do well in Section A. Now, every examiner's report has 4 sample questions, so these are really worth having a look at. And the 4 that are in the most recent report cover Class 1A national insurance contributions, so which is basically deciding what taxable benefits those are going to be based on. There is one on the gift holdover relief conditions, which is actually very, very similar to one that was released in the September-December, I've got a thumbs down there, very similar to one that was released in the September-December 23 examiner's report. So this is why you've got to practice past exam questions, because you will then see some familiarity, hopefully. We had one on group VAT registration, which was basically just identifying which companies could register as a group. And we nearly always have something on admin. So in the most recent report, it was one on self-assessment and the late filing penalty. So I do just want to have a quick look at that last one, just to give you some hints as to how to approach these and how to answer them. So the Section A question 4, which was on self-assessment, the question was, what's the maximum penalty that Ruby will have to pay to HMRC? So we've got Ruby, who's filed her self-assessment return for the tax year 23-24 on the 30th of July 2025. And this one is a multiple choice. You've got a choice of 4 and you need to select the right answer. So you should be thinking with any penalties, what was the due date? How late is this person? And you should hopefully, with some of these questions, be able to immediately rule out at least one of the answers. So for this one, the tax return is late, there is going to be a penalty. So we know it can't be answer C, where the penalty is 0. The other thing to just remember as well is that for all of these questions, you get 2 marks for a correct answer, 0 if it's not correct. So even if it was almost right, even if you've just made one small mistake, if it's not absolutely right, you will score 0. But you don't get marks taken away. So if you're not sure, have a guess, because a wrong answer doesn't reduce your marks. It just means that you score nothing. So for this one, you needed to just think, when was that tax return due? And it would have been due on the 31st of January following the end of the tax year. That's a really key date that you need to remember. The due date was the 31st of January 25, and it was sent in on the 30th of July 2025. So it was exactly 6 months late. Now we get an immediate £100 penalty for being late, and we've then got further penalties. So again, if you knew that there was another penalty, you could rule out option B, because that's just the £100. So then you've got a choice of £1,000 or £200. Now 200 is actually what a company would be fined, but for individuals, we have a daily penalty of £10 a day for a maximum of 90 days if we submit more than 3 months late. So that will be £900 in total as a maximum, plus the 100. So the answer is A. So make sure that you learn your admin rules, because we do very, very often hear about admin questions in Section A, and those are nearly always in the ones that the examiner releases and says that people didn't do very well on. So that is Section A. Have a look at the examiner's report and you'll see the other 3 questions that were released as well. Section B is where we have our 3 case scenarios, each with 5 objective test questions, and these are not released on the practice platform either. So again, look at the examiner's report and you will find there one of these scenarios. So the way that they do this is, in every examiner's report, the examiner will release one of the Section B cases, and these in theory could be on anything, but the examiner's reports have only ever shown scenarios on inheritance tax, VAT and CGT. So I think there's a fairly strong chance that in your exam there will be one scenario on each of those taxes. As I say, disclaimer, it's not an absolute guarantee, but certainly that's what tends to be tested. And each of the scenarios will have 5 questions on that tax. The one that's in the examiner's report, I'm not going to go through that here, but you can have a look. It's an inheritance tax scenario, and it covers 5 separate little questions, exactly the same style as section A. So these might be multiple choice, fill in the blanks, drop downs, that kind of thing. And we had one on advantages of lifetime gifts, the death tax on a chargeable lifetime transfer, lifetime exemptions, the death estate with evaluation of shares, and then the exemption for normal expenditure from income. And these, although they're case scenarios, are going to be independent questions, which means that if you get one wrong, you should still be able to get all of the rest of those right. And each of them is marked out of 2. Again, 2 marks for getting it right, 0 if you get it wrong. So have a look through the examiner's report and you'll see that inheritance tax scenario. Then we come on to section C, which is the 3 constructed response questions. And these ones are the ones that are on the practice platform. And the section C questions that have been released are in fact from the June 2025 exam, which is really good because that means that that is in the same Finance Act as the exam that you're going to be sitting in September. So what I want to do now is just to show you how to actually find those questions on the New Look Practice I really can't say that. On the New Look Practice platform, get my teeth in. So I'm going to show you a short video just to show you how to actually access and assign that exam to yourself on the new platform, just in case you haven't looked at that already. So if you bear with me for a second, there will be a short video which should hopefully pop up in the media window.
So this is the New Look Practice platform, if you haven't seen it already. And I think it is pretty easy to navigate around. Certainly I've managed to do that, and I'm not the most technologically literate. So if you want to allocate yourself an exam, you can click on the Browse Available Exams and then select your exam category. So you've got all of the categories there. I've selected taxation. You can choose the variant, so the United Kingdom for me, and in the exam type, so we're going to look at a past exam, but you've also got the specimen exam, you've got practice exams, and very useful is the blank workspace as well. So if you just want to practice questions generally, then you can click to get the blank workspace, which then looks like the response areas that you will have in the real exam. So we want a past exam. And for our past exams, it will then show all of the available options. And the one that we want is the TX UK June 2025, 25-26 syllabus. So just note that if you are attempting the past exams for tax, then that is actually the only one at the moment that is in the correct Finance Act. So June 2025 was in the same Finance Act as September 25. The other ones are useful to have a look at, but bear in mind that those will use old rates and allowances. The specimen exam and the practice exams have all been updated to the correct Finance Act. And all you need to do then is just to click Assign, and that will then assign that exam to you. Once you've assigned it, you can view your assignments. And I've been quite busy here, but for taxation, I've got 8 assignments and I should see there, so I've been having a look at all of these. I've got the blank workspace, and the one that we want is the TX UK June 2025. So if you haven't already had a look at it, it will just say start. If you've already had a look at it, then you'll have the option to resume. And once you get past the initial screens, you then just have the 3 Section C questions. And the examiner's report makes a lot more sense if you look at it in conjunction with this exam. So definitely worth having a go at this exam if you haven't looked at it already. And this is what the examiner's report is all about. We have the first question, the 10-mark question, which has 5 requirements. So this is all about 3 different people, Fiona, Emily and Garth, and you've basically got 1 mini question about each one. Then you've got the 15-mark income tax question, which has 3 requirements. And then the 15-mark corporation tax question, which also has 3 requirements.
So what I'm going to do is to have a look at that 10-mark question, the higher skills type question, in a bit of detail, and then we'll have a quick look as well at the other 2. So the 10-mark question in the most recent exam covered assessment of trading profits for a sole trader, VAT registration, and everybody's favourite, a bit of NIC admin. So this question is the hardest to predict, and it could be on pretty much anything. In recent sittings, they try to test more sort of higher skills to prepare you better for when you come on to do the advanced tax exam. And the first part is a calculation of Fiona's trading profits, which are taxable. And to do this, you needed to know about the basis of assessment rules, which have recently changed. So you were given the taxable trading profits for 3 accounting periods and some transition profits. Now, the examiner said about this that it was generally good, but many candidates ignored the transition profits, and then there is an emphasis that you need to know the new rules. So these rules were tested for the first time in the June sitting. So from the tax year 2024-25, we have moved from the current year basis to the tax year basis. So we assess the profits that arise between the 6th of April and the 5th of April. As we transition from the old rules to the new rules, we may have had some transition profits, which will be given to you in the exam if you need them, and those will be spread over 5 years. So you might have had a look at this, you've read the examiner's report. What if you want to have a look at the marking guide and see what the model answer is? Well, this is where we can go back to the practice platform, and let me show you. I've got another short video to demonstrate how you can actually then access the model answers and the marking guide. So again, this is just going to appear in your media window.
Once you've finished the exam, and you don't have to attempt all of the questions, you could just look at them, you get to this end screen, and if you click on End Exam, you won't be able to return to this version of the exam, but what it does mean is that you will then be able to access the model answers and the marking guide. And if you go back to where you've assigned exams, we can now see that the TX UK June 2025 exam is showing as Mark Exam. So I should now be able to access the answers and the marking guides. If you'd attempted the questions, your answer will show on the right-hand side. And then on the left side, we have the sample answers. So this is really useful because not only can you see the correct answer, but you can also work out how much you would have scored by looking at the marks that are allocated for each part. So for example, for the 10-mark question for part A, if you forgot the transition profits, then you would have lost a total of 1 of the 3 marks available.
So let's have a more detailed look then at that marking guide. So this is really useful to see how to present your answer. So if you're ever working through questions, not quite sure what to do, look at the model answers, the answers on the ACCA's website, and this will give you an idea of a suitable presentation. You don't necessarily have to do it like this, but this is usually going to be the best way to set it out. And it will show a fairly detailed breakdown of the marks so that you can see how those marks were allocated. And this is good for you. It's not just good for the marker, because you want to score 50% at least in the exam. So if you have a go at a question, try to mark your answer and just see, would you have got 50%? And if you did, brilliant. If you didn't, then of course you can learn from this. So this should then highlight any technical areas that you maybe need to revisit. So then you can go back to your materials or maybe go to the study hub to have a revise through those technical areas. So that was the first part of the 10-mark question. The second part was all about VAT registration. Now this was a 3-mark section which was partly written. So there will be some written elements in section C, and the requirement was to explain from what date Emily would be required to register compulsorily for VAT and start charging output VAT. So you had some details about Emily's sales, monthly sales, which change partway through the year. So we're looking at when she crosses the limit and when she has to be registered for VAT, so when she has to be effectively registered. The examiner said that many candidates worked out the month when the limit was exceeded, but struggled to identify the effective registration date. So again, the marking guide and the model answer can help you here to see what that answer should have been, how to present it. Remember that you have got the tax tables in the exam, and the VAT registration limit is currently £90,000. That is given, and it did change fairly recently. So always look at the tables, make sure you're using the correct rates for your sitting. And once you've worked out when the limit is crossed, the effective registration date is going to be, if we go over the limit in September, from the end of the following month. So we go a month on from September to the end of October, and Emily would have to start adding VAT from the 1st of November, or it could be from an agreed earlier date. So just be careful, read the requirement. You're not being asked when to notify HMRC, you're being asked when the registration becomes effective. And the good thing in this exam is that if you're wrong, but you're then consistently wrong, you can still get own figure rule marks. So if you got the month wrong when the limit was exceeded, but you gave the correct date based on your first calculation, you should still get the credit for stating when the registration would be effective. So if you were, say, a month late and you had 1 month later, then you could still get that second mark. And that will be the case for all of the questions in section C. If you make a mistake, but you carry on and use the right method, then you can still get the remaining marks. Section C of this question was all about administration. So it was broken down into 3 subparts, and we had 2 marks in C part 1 for reporting employee NICs. And so this asked to explain how and when Garth, so another individual, would have to report details to HMRC of the NICs due in respect of his employees' earnings. And we did have a little bit of information which actually we didn't really need to use here. And the examiner said, oh dear, this bit was quite poorly answered, probably because NIC admin is everybody's least favourite subject. So if you didn't know before, let's have a look now and remember it for next time. We've got Class 1 NICs for employees' earnings, which are reported under pay-as-you-earn under the real-time reporting system for 1 mark. And so when that has to be reported is each month on or before the time when the employees are paid. So make sure that you address both parts of the requirement. How are they reported and when? You've got 2 marks, so 2 different points. And it does just emphasize that you need to learn those admin rules. We saw them in section A, we've got them again in section C. So if there's one thing that you do before the exam, have a look at admin. I know I hated it, but it is really useful. So that was C part 1. The second bit was about payment of class 4 national insurance. So we just had 1 mark here for stating when Garth would have to pay the class 4 NICs in respect of his self-employment. They gave you the figure, so you didn't have to calculate it. You just had to say when it was due. And it did tell you, a bit of a clue, that until the 1st of October 24, he was employed and all of his tax was collected under pay as you earn. So that was there for a reason. All of the information that's given in the question is there for a reason. So think about why they have told you this. So we needed to state when he'd have to pay his class 4. The examiner said, again, quite badly answered. Many candidates didn't know that class 4 is paid under self-assessment. So if you didn't know then, you do now. And some provided dates for payments on account, which would normally have been correct, but not if it's your first year as self-employed, because the payments on account would be based on the previous years. So for this one, in the marking guide, we've got the due date, which is just the same as the balancing payment date. Class 4 is paid on the same dates as income tax under self-assessment. So that would be on the 31st of January 2026 for the tax year 2024-25. A couple of points about this as well. If you are asked for due dates in the exam, don't just state the rule. So don't just state 31st of January following the end of the tax year. Give the actual date. And that is 1 mark. And look at the number of marks for each section to kind of work out how much you're going to need to do. If you've got a section with just 1 mark, they're not going to need lots of different dates. So that should have been a clue as well, that this was going to be a fairly simple, short answer. And then the last bit of this question was still on the subject of national insurance, but this time the employment allowance. So the employment allowance for employers, and we were told that Garth qualified for this. The question is to explain to what extent he will be able to benefit from the employment allowance for the tax year 24-25. And you were given figures, you were told what the employer's contributions were. So the employment allowance is available against employers' contributions. And again, the examiner said, not answered particularly well. Candidates didn't answer the requirement, possibly because they weren't quite sure what it was actually asking. But what they wanted you to do for 1 mark is just to say, really, how much can Garth use? The employment allowance is £5,000, but it can only be used against employers' class 1 contributions. So all you needed to do was just to state that and then use the figure from the question. The employer's class 1 was given and it was 1362. So that's how much employment allowance he would benefit from. Easy when you know the answer, isn't it? So think carefully, think very carefully about the requirement. What are they asking you to do? Read it once, read it twice, and use the information from the scenario. If they give you information in the scenario, it's there for a reason. So think about why that might be relevant. So that was the 10-mark question. So I'm going to have a quick look now through the 15-mark income tax question. So this was quite a nice question and it covered some fairly standard areas. We had adjustment of trading profits, including capital allowances. So this time on the accruals basis, not the cash basis. Assessment of profits, so actually quite similar to what we had in the 10-mark question, and a calculation of taxable income. So we know that there is going to be a 15-mark question on aspects of income tax. We just don't know what aspects that will cover. So this one had an adjustment of profits in part A. So what I've got here is an extract from the sample answer and marking guide, because this is what the examiner refers to in the report. So the examiner did specify that you don't have to do a separate working for capital allowances necessarily. You can, but you don't always need to. When you do an adjustment of profits, you usually are going to be starting with a net profit figure and then adding or deducting any disallowable items, deducting any items that are allowed that haven't been deducted. So if you look at the presentation here, we have a single column. We've got all the items listed out. You need to make sure that you label your answer so that the marker can see what you're adding and what you're taking away. This one does show workings on the face of the computation. Now you can do workings in the cells in the spreadsheet, and I would recommend that you do that. But if it's a complicated working, and if you're not very good at formulae, it's a good idea to write out workings as well. And for the capital allowances, we have a delivery van and a car. And because it was that was all, you didn't have to do the full pro forma. And the examiner also commented that the capital allowances on the car were quite poorly done. So there were two things that you had to do with this. You had to recognise that it's an 8 months period. Always look at the dates, short periods, long periods, very, very common. So you had to time apportion the allowance for the car, and also there was some private use. So you needed to restrict that for the private use. So both of those things, and there were 2 marks for working out the allowances on that car. If you make a mistake, you should still score some of those. So that was the first part. The second part covered assessments. And so this very, very similar to the one that we saw in the 10-mark question. This is matching the profits to the tax years, which is now on a tax year basis. So you apportion to find the profits that fall between the 6th of April and the 5th of April. And because this was a new business, we started from the date of commencement in the first year, and then we've got 12 months worth of profits taxed in the second year. The examiner said that this wasn't particularly well done and advised that you have a look at the model answer. So that's what I've got here, and show which tax year your workings relate to. So make it clear which tax year you're dealing with, and you don't have to do it like this. You could use headings, that would be fine. But as I say, it's always good to look at the model answers to see how the examiner and the marking team would like you to prepare yours. And if you can do it like that, then the marker will love you and will be more likely to give you a pass mark. So that was part B. Part C, I haven't got the marks and the marking guide here, but part C was taxable income. And taxable income, read very, very carefully, is the income after deducting the personal allowance. If you calculated the income tax liability, that would have been lovely. You would have wasted some time and scored no extra marks. So if you're asked for taxable income, you don't need to go any further. So read the questions very carefully and make sure that you're not doing more than you need to. So that was the income tax question, and then the 15-mark corporation tax question from the examiner's report, the one that's been released, is actually kind of similar. We've got an adjustment, but this time an adjustment of a trading loss, including capital allowances, calculation of taxable total profits with loss reliefs, and a little written section on loss reliefs as well. So it's a really good example of how things are different when you're working out the adjustment of profits, the capital allowances for a company compared to a person. And for this one, again, I've just picked out some of the key points from the examiner's report that should help you hopefully in your exam. So the adjustment of the loss, very, very similar to what we've just seen in the income tax question. We've got a single column, and we've got the starting point is a negative figure. So one of the things that the examiners highlighted for this one, which is something that's regularly in the report, is how you show positives and negatives in your answer. And they recommend that if you're dealing with a loss, you show that as a negative figure to begin with, and then all of the negative figures should be shown either in brackets or with a minus sign. So you can format these in the practice platform. You can format them so that they're in brackets. You can make them red and in brackets if you want to make them stand out really well. But the key thing is that the marker can clearly see which you're adding and which you are taking away. And then when you come to the total, you can just use the sum function. So you can go equals sum, open a bracket, select the cells, close bracket, and it will add those all up for you. What they have said is not successful is if you just list everything out and then try to show a formula for C1 minus C2 plus C3, that kind of thing, the marker will hate you. It's really difficult to follow, so please don't do that. So show the negatives in brackets, ideally, single column. And this one was one where we had a common requirement, which is to show with a 0 anything that you're not adjusting for. And that was something that the examiner highlighted. There was a staff party, which is allowable, and there is a half mark for actually putting that in as 0. If you didn't put that in as 0, you would miss out on that very easy half mark. So make sure that you follow the instructions. If it says to show items that you're not adjusting with a 0, then do that. And for this one, again, we had capital allowances, but it was a bit more complicated. So for this one, because there were values brought forward, we had, I think, several additions, disposals, then this one, it was better to do a separate working for capital allowances. And it's absolutely fine to do that. So you could always do a separate capital allowances working, but you don't necessarily have to. And I think that's one of the most common questions I get asked is, oh, some people do capital allowances like this, some people do it like that. Which pro forma is correct? I'm really confused. And the answer is that it's just a working. So there isn't a set pro forma for capital allowances. You just need to make sure that you use a working that's clear and that gets you the right answer. So usually we would suggest a pro forma. So, you know, the CAPLAN material suggests a pro forma. The study hub, you'll find one on there. BPP probably suggests a very similar one, but it is just a working. And the most important thing is that the marker can see what you're doing in your working and therefore allocate you the marks accordingly. So that was the capital allowances and the adjustment of the loss. And I wanted to show you the second part of this because you were actually given a partly completed spreadsheet, which is unusual. So you might not have come across that before. And so in part B, we had 5 marks for working out taxable total profits. So this was following on from part A, where you had to show how that loss that you'd calculated would actually be set off. So you were setting it off against the current period and then carrying back, and the little twist was that the previous period was only 6 months long, so you had to time apportion the profits before the qualifying charitable donations. And the examiner said that it wasn't answered as well as could be expected, and the carryback particularly caused problems. So losses, you need to make sure you learn the rules for sole traders, for companies, and make sure that you know exactly what losses can be set against. Current period for a company, it's before qualifying charitable donations as much as possible. Carry back for 12 months against profits before qualifying charitable donations. And if the previous period is not 12 months, then you time apportion the profit to work out how much you can set off against that earliest period. So that bit, not quite so well done, but have a look because we had this pre-formatted spreadsheet, which was quite interesting. And the final part of this corporation tax question was a written section, 3 marks for explaining all of the possible options for loss relief and setting out the potential advantage of claiming against a later period. And the examiner said that this was very poorly answered and not enough detail was given generally. Good example of where you need to look at the number of marks available. And for 3 marks, you are going to be needing to make more than just one comment. Okay, so what they wanted you to do was to set out all of the options. Current period, what do we set against? Carry back previous 12 months, what do we set against? Make sure that you state that you have to do the current period claim first. Carry forwards against total profits, and that's the only one where you can choose how much to offset. So for a written section, look at the number of marks, and you can usually gauge that it's going to be 0.5 to 1 mark per point. So 1 mark for a good relevant point. And so if you've only got 1 point, then you're not going to score 3 marks. So that one was a nice little written section. So that was the end of the examiner's report. So as I said, have a look at that, have a go at the past exam from the practice platform, and have a good look through the sample answer and marking guide. Now, the next thing that I want to do very quickly is just to point out the syllabus changes and basically say that there are none, not between June and September 25. Now, I don't know if you're aware, but the tax exams go on a different cycle to the rest of the exams. So I think all the other exams change in September, but tax is different. So I work in tax. We always like to say we're different. Tax is different. And so for tax, the June 2025 exam was based on the Finance Act of 2024. The September 25 exam, the December 25 exam, and the March 26 exam are all going to be based on that same Finance Act. Now, if you skipped a sitting, didn't sit in June, if you've been using old materials, then have a look at the Finance Act article to see what's changed since last year. And if I just quickly highlight, I'm not going to go through these, but just to show you some of the things that did change under the Finance Act of 2024, which was first tested in June. We've got the cash basis and transition profits, which we saw in that first question from section C. The dividend nil rate band has reduced. The child benefit charge has changed. National insurance rates, we've got some changes there. Class 2 national insurance has gone. Whoop, whoop. And there have been some changes to the pension limits. So all of these are explained in the article, and a lot of these are in the tax tables as well. For corporation tax, enhanced capital allowances, we've got additions back again. So additions, we now have full expensing and then disposals of assets on which enhanced capital allowances were claimed. So those were tested last year as well. Marginal rates, so those are not brand new, but they have emphasised that marginal rates of tax where we've got the different rates of corporation tax are important, so make sure that you know how those work. And IFRS 18 is quite a big thing, isn't it, I think, for some of the financial reporting papers, by all accounts. For tax, it's not that big a deal. So all you really need to be aware of for IFRS 18 is that some of the terminology has changed. So for corporation tax, slightly weirdly, we now talk about profit before income taxes, even though it's corporation tax. So profit before tax has now become profit before income taxes. But other than that, you don't really need to know anything about IFRS 18 for the tax exam. And for the capital taxes, so capital gains tax and inheritance tax are our capital taxes. We've got a change in the annual exempt amount, that's reduced to 3,000. And we've got changes in the rates. So the rate for residential properties, the higher rate has reduced. So nothing's changed since June, but if you were studying before that, then you might want to just have a look at those. So before we just move on to our question and answer session, I just wanted to reinforce what to do now. So you've got, what, 3 weeks left? So what do you do between now and the exam? Ideally, the main focus should be practicing questions. So practicing questions, use the practice platform, have a go at the practice exams on there, have a go at the specimen exam if you haven't done that already. And hopefully you will have a question bank that you can use as well. There's the study hub, which has got some questions. And when you're practicing questions, when you're practicing section C questions, do use that blank workspace. So even if you were, say, practicing a question from your Kaplan exam kit, then if you do that in the practice platform, you'll get used to the functionality, and especially the spreadsheet, which is not quite as good as Excel. You can't insert or delete lines, so you need to make sure that you're getting used to that. Make sure that you cover the whole syllabus. So particularly for section A, as I've said, the examiner always says that people don't know enough different areas. So don't just focus on the subjects that you like. Do admin, do VAT. So those are some of the areas that I think people struggle with the most. Sometimes those are areas that don't get covered in class because they're fairly straightforward, but make sure that you have a look at some questions. Have a go at the mock exam. So there is the ACCA's mock exam, more about that in a few minutes, but have a go at a mock exam and make sure that you are practicing questions in exam time. So in terms of exam time, you've got 3 hours to answer the exam, which works out as 1.8 minutes per mark. And you need to make sure that you allocate your time. So for section A, you've got 30 marks, 1.8 minutes. So you should be spending 54 minutes in total on section A. And then say for the 10-mark question, you should be spending no longer than 18 minutes. So if you allocate your time and practice doing the exam questions to exam time, and if you find that you are running out of time, then you need to do things to speed up. So, you know, is it just because you need to practice more? Is it because you're not very good at the software? But make sure that you are practicing to time. And another question that I often get asked is, which section of the exam should I do first? Should I start with section A? Should I start with section C? Everybody's telling me different things, and that's because there's no right answer. You need to do whichever section you're happiest with. Personally, I used to like doing the multiple choice questions first, the objective tests. Some people prefer to start with section C. The most important thing is that you do what works for you, and only by practicing will you know what that is, and you make sure that you attempt all of the questions in the exam, because if you haven't answered a question, you will score nothing. Okay, so make sure that you have a strategy. And I can even see here, I'm just looking at the questions and answers, and one of the first ones I can see is, in what order should we attempt the questions? So hopefully that's answered that question for you there. So what I'll do now is, in these last sort of 15 minutes or so, is to have a look at the questions and answers. So I've got some questions that have come in my chat panel here. So let me just have a look at some of these. Oh gosh, quite a lot. So we've got another question: how much time should be allocated? So we've just dealt with that one. How should I revise effectively? I finished the syllabus but realize I've forgotten most of the concepts or rules, which is a very, very common issue. So if you've forgotten everything, then when you're practicing questions, if you're trying to do a question and you find I can't remember something, look it up. So go back to your study notes, run through an example again, and practicing questions will highlight the areas that you need to focus on. So if you're not sure what to revise, then, you know, pick a sample exam, one of the practice exams from the practice platform, say, go through it. And if you find that you don't know the answer, then look it up. So hopefully that will then help. I'm just trying to pick out some other questions here. Where are we? Is it possible to pass tax if I start practice and lectures from today with 3 weeks to go? I have seen it done. If you're starting from scratch today and you've got 3 weeks to go, then it's going to be a struggle. But I did once have a student who I think learned everything over a weekend and passed. However, that was quite exceptional, but people do learn at different rates. So, you know, if you still feel like there's a long way to go, 3 weeks is a long time, but ideally you should be into revision now. The question about the employment allowance. So the employment allowance is for national insurance. So that is for employers, and it's available to set off against total class 1 contributions. Not available if you've got a company where you've just got one employee. let's just have a look through it. I'm trying to pick some questions here that will be useful sort of for everybody. So could I confirm whether the formula functions work in the actual exam? In previous exams, the functionality wasn't working for showing a minus in brackets. Hopefully they should work. So certainly I haven't come across anybody stating that those don't work. If the minus won't show in brackets, then as long as you put the minus figures in with a minus sign, then that's fine. So if the brackets don't work, they should work, but if they didn't, then as long as you show your minuses with a negative sign, then that should be fine. Partnerships are still part of the syllabus. Yep, so splitting the profits between partnerships. So that is still part of the TX syllabus. If it's a simple question with more marks, are we required to show more workings? Oh, that's quite a good question. Yeah, usually the number of marks will give you an idea as to the amount of workings that you might need to do. So if it is just a 1 mark, then that's probably not going to require as many workings as something that's worth 5 marks. But as a general guide, I would say that any figure that's in your answer that is not just taken straight from the question needs to show some sort of working. So even if it's just something simple like timesing the monthly salary by 12, then that needs to be shown. And a simple working like that you can just do in the cell. So, 5,000 times 12 in the cell. If it's more complicated, and particularly where you're working out things like, say, national insurance, where you're working out the amount after deducting the nil band and then timesing it by a percentage, anything that's a bit more complicated, I would be inclined to actually show that working on the face of the computation and then do it as a formula in the cell. And don't combine too many things. So I have tried to mark some of my students' answers sometimes where they've done an income tax computation and they've done the whole thing in one cell. So they've deducted the personal allowance and then they've done the bit in the basic rate band and then the bit in the higher rate band, all in a single cell, which is horrible to mark and very, very difficult to unpick. So I would say that if you are doing something like, say, an income tax computation that has lots of different steps, always set out those different steps so that the marker can see them. So separate line for the personal allowance, separate line for the amount that's taxed at the basic rate, show what rate you've used, separate line for the amount taxed at the higher rate, show what rate you've used, and so on. So if you try marking somebody else's script, try marking your own when you've gone and had some lunch and come back. If it's not easy to follow, then it won't be easy for the marker either. So as a rule, the more workings you can show, the better. And everything that you haven't simply taken from the question should show some sort of working, whether it's in a cell or on the face of a computation. The question about annual exemptions here. So for inheritance tax and capital gains tax. So yeah, inheritance tax and capital gains tax are 2 completely separate taxes. And it just so happens that now the annual exemption has become the same for both of those. So for inheritance tax, we've got an exemption of £3,000 per tax year, which has been the same since when I took my exams, I think. It changed from 2,000 to 3,000 when I was partway through my exams, which was 30-something years ago. Now, the inheritance tax annual exemption is the only one that you can carry forwards for 1 tax year. So if you make a gift, you've got 3,000 for the current tax year, and then you can bring forwards 3,000 from the previous tax year if you haven't used it already. For capital gains tax, we have an annual exempt amount, which is a separate figure, totally separate. And so you get that as well, and that one can't be carried forwards. So we've already talked about which section to start. Let me look through the rest of my questions. Just finished my tax syllabus today, want to start full-fledged practice. Am I on the right path? Yep, so if you finish the syllabus, 3 weeks is great. So that should be plenty of time, hopefully, to practice lots of questions. And I think the key from now until the exam is little and often. Practice a little bit every day, do a selection. So, you know, set yourself targets, do some section A questions, do 3 section C questions sort of every day, say, and the more you practice, the more likely you are to pass. So if you think about it, you've got in total about sort of 33 separate questions in the exam with all the section A, section B, section C. So that's a lot of different areas to cover. If you just focus on one particular area, then you are severely restricting your chances. So the more you practice, the more different areas you cover, the more likely you are to get a pass. But start from now, do as many as you can. Question about section C: is the whole syllabus tested in section C or just certain areas? Well, we've got an income tax question, a corporation tax question, which will be mainly on income tax, but of course that can cover lots of different things. So it could have an employee, self-employed, you might have property income, you might have other types of income. So although the income tax question, say, is just on income tax, that does cover quite a broad range of topics. Corporation tax, again, can cover quite a few different things. It might include losses, might include groups. Sometimes you get some gains for companies. Sometimes you might get some written sections on admin, say, and very occasionally you do get some other bits. So maybe a little bit of VAT thrown in there as well. And the 10-mark section in section C, question in section C, could be on anything. So again, you need to make sure that you cover as many areas as possible. So let's just have a look and see. I've got quite a lot of questions. I'm aware that we are getting close to the end. I'll just see. This is a good one. Answering all questions, do you allow for transposed figures that cause an error but it's carried through to the whole question? Would some marks still be obtained? Absolutely. So if you're doing a question in section C, and that's the only one where you will be carrying through figures, if you do a question in section C and you have a transposition error, then you probably shouldn't even be penalised at all for that. So if you have, say, picked a figure from the question and you've transposed 2 of the numbers, then the markers shouldn't penalise you for that in the real exam, because it's clear that you've just read the wrong number. And then if you've done the right things with that, as long as they can see what you've done, so they can see what rates you've used, what you've multiplied it by, then you should get all of the rest of the credit. So that's a really key concept. And that's why you always want to carry on to the end. So if you're doing an adjustment of profits and you think, oh, I can't remember how to do that, there's no point in doing any more. There is, because whatever your figure is, if you've worked out trading profits and you then put your figure into the income tax computation, even if it's wrong, you can still get full marks for calculating the income tax, say. Okay. How are we doing, Kirsty? Are we needing to move on to the final
stages? I think we've got 2 minutes to go, so I think we probably should start to wrap up.
Okay.
But we can probably take one more question, Helen.
One more question. Oh, let me see if I can find a good one here. Here we go. I was on a marginal fail last time, 48%. What's usually where people can pick up those last few marks? So 48% means that you are almost there. So I would say those last few marks, if you just practice a few more section A questions, go away, learn some more admin, then hopefully that will be the clincher. Okay. Or if you find that you're running out of time, then you need to make sure, a bit like practicing for a marathon, speed up, and you'll speed up by practicing more and more questions. Okay. But 48%, you are almost there. So definitely this time. Good luck.
Thank you, Helen. Okay, so I'm afraid I know we could go on answering questions all day, but I'm afraid that is as much as we have time for. Before we go, we have a short poll for you to take. So just to tell us a little bit about what you know about the resources that are available for you, can you just complete the poll and tell us when the pre-September 2025 mock and debrief dates are? So are both the mock and debrief, are both the mock exam and the debrief video released on the 9th of August? Are they on the 8th of August and the 16th of August? Are they on the 8th and the 15th of August? Or do you have no idea at all? Okay, we've got a few of you submitting answers. I'll wait just a little moment to get a few more answers from you. So lots of you on the call, and please do be honest if you have no idea, that's okay. Okay, in the interest of time, we've got quite a few answers, so we'll go ahead and just have a look. Okay, so yeah, we've got a bit of a tie, I think, between the 8th and the 15th and no idea. So I think, so the correct answer was the 8th of August for the mock exams going live and the 15th of August for the debrief videos. So as many of you know the right answer as have no idea. So that's good to know. But absolutely, the mock exams have been available in the practice platform since the 8th of August, which was last week. And the debrief videos will be available on our Student Support YouTube channel this Friday, the 15th of August. So do come back, attempt your mock exam, and then come back, mark it yourself, and then watch the debrief videos and find out some tips in terms of how you could have done better. Okay, so that brings us to the end of today's live session. I really do hope that you find it helpful and you picked up some useful tips. But just before we wrap up completely, a quick reminder to check out the updated resources in our resource section of the webinar console. These will be really useful to you as you prepare for your exam. And as we said before, don't worry if you've missed anything. Everyone who registered will receive an email tomorrow with a link to the recording. So I'd just like to say a big thank you to all of you for joining us today. I'm sure you will all join me in thanking Helen for her support and also giving a special shout out to the team working behind the scenes today to make our session run smoothly. And so with that, it's goodbye from us and all the best for your exams.
Good luck. Thank you.